In a world where love and trust can be shattered in an instant, the journey of one husband reveals the painful truth behind betrayal. Husband got karmic brutal revenge on a cheating wife after revealed her affair is a compelling audio story that dives deep into the emotional turmoil faced by a devoted partner who discovers his wife's infidelity. As the layers of deceit are peeled away, we witness the heart-wrenching pain of betrayal transform into a powerful quest for justice. Through a series of shocking revelations and unexpected twists, this tale explores the harsh realities of love lost and the consequences of betrayal. Join us as we delve into a poignant narrative filled with raw emotion, highlighting the husband's struggle to reclaim his dignity and the karmic forces that ultimately bring retribution. This story serves as a reminder that actions have consequences and that sometimes, the universe has a way of balancing the scales in the most unexpected ways. It was a night etched into my memory forever, a seemingly ordinary Saturday that took a devastating turn. The air was filled with laughter as I, along with my ex-wife Marge and our daughters, gathered for dinner. Young Rachel, who often spent the weekends with us while her mother, Andorra, worked night shifts as a cab controller, was also at the table. Rachel and our daughter, Orly, had become the best of friends during their high school years, filling our home with the joy of their camaraderie. Marge and I had known each other for years, and although she was familiar with Andorra, I had never had the chance to meet her. I was often away for work, trying to establish myself in a competitive market, leaving Marge to handle most of the parenting duties. Sundays typically saw Rachel being picked up by a cab driver, who would often surprise the girls with treats, much to their delight. But that fateful evening, while we were enjoying our meal, Marge dropped a bombshell that shattered my world. "Pete, I want a divorce. I'm leaving you." The words hung heavy in the air, and disbelief washed over me. After 10 years of marriage, my first reaction was to question reality itself. I managed to keep my composure, although I was barely holding it together for the sake of the girls. "I've found someone else," Marge continued, her voice steady. "I want to spend my life with him." Her declaration, especially in front of our 2 8-year-old daughters, felt like a betrayal I never saw coming. I couldn't believe that she would choose such a moment to share her desire to leave, as if our family dinner were just an ordinary evening, devoid of the emotional weight of her words. Marge, seemingly unfazed, insisted I would need to keep the house for Orly, even as she spoke about a trip around the world that she intended to take. "You've got to be kidding me," I exclaimed, the volume of my voice betraying my calm facade. I knew she chose this moment strategically, fully aware that I would hold back in front of the kids. When we first met, we had dreams of exploring the world together, discussing bucket list destinations like the Grand Canyon in New Zealand. But somewhere along the way, those dreams became distant echoes drowned out by the realities of parenting. Marge had wanted to wait until the children were older to travel, a promise that seemed to evaporate in her pursuit of newfound freedom. Feeling crushed, I excused myself from the table and went outside to the garden. I began pruning the roses, trying to channel my frustration into something productive. It was there that I noticed Rachel and Orly quietly joining me, diligently working together. "Watch out for the thorns, girls. You're not wearing gloves," I warned them, trying to distract myself from the whirlwind of emotions inside me. "What's Mom doing?" I asked, my heart heavy with concern. Orly replied matter-of-factly, "She's upstairs packing." My anger simmered beneath the surface, but I didn't want to lash out in front of the girls. How could Marge do this to her children? "Sorry, Daddy," Orly said. "You didn't leave us, Mom did." Her words cut deeper than I anticipated, revealing a stark truth I hadn't acknowledged. As I watched the girls hold hands and support one another in the garden, I was left questioning everything I thought I knew about Marge. How could someone who seemed so loving be capable of such betrayal? Feeling the weight of my despair, I announced a trip for ice cream, hoping to lift the mood. The girls cheered, and we headed to a local restaurant for sundaes. As they savored their treats, I took a moment to process what Marge's announcement meant for our family and our future. Surprisingly, the love I had for her dissipated like mist, My focus now shifted solely to how to care for Orly amidst this turmoil. I considered reaching out to my sister Carol for support, needing help to navigate this new reality. As I dialed her number, I could hear the concern in her voice when I shared the brief details of Marge's shocking announcement. "Marge ran off with some guy," Carol exclaimed, disbelief evident in her tone. "Who is this guy?" "I don't know much, just some Casanova," I replied, frustration boiling beneath my calm exterior. Orly chimed in, "His name is Ronald. He's a library customer." I felt the ground shift beneath me. Marge had been working part-time at the library, and I was left with an image of her life unfurling without me. Amidst the chaos, I expressed my concerns about picking up Orly from school each day. I could manage the mornings but struggled with the afternoon hours. Orly, ever the pragmatic child, reassured me that Rachel's mother would help out. "It wouldn't be fair to ask her to do that every day," I responded, knowing it was a lot to ask of another single parent. But Orly quickly assured me, "Oh, it's fine. We thought it all through. Rachel will stay with us on the weekends, and I'll stay with Rachel and her mom during the week." I was astonished by her maturity, realizing that even in the midst of upheaval, the girls were working together to find solutions. "Carol," I said, still grappling with the reality of our situation, "I think we might need to set up a plan." Though I had never met Rachel's mother, it seemed our lives were intertwining in unexpected ways. As I hung up the phone, I knew I had a long road ahead. My heart was heavy with uncertainty, but I was determined to put my daughters first, to shield them from the storm that had unexpectedly invaded our lives. What lay ahead was a journey of healing, resilience, and finding a new normal, one step at a time. I found myself in a whirlwind of uncertainty, caught in the crosshairs of a situation I never anticipated. The cab driver, with a hint of urgency in his tone, was urging my mom to consider working on Sundays. Rachel, ever the supportive friend, chimed in, noting how much extra my mom could earn, yet my mother hesitated, clearly not wanting to impose on Orly's mom. "What does Rachel's mother even look like?" I asked, genuinely perplexed. I had no clue, I'd never met her. Carol, ever practical, suggested, "Well, you'd better have the chat soon and gauge her thoughts on the whole arrangement." In the midst of our discussion, Carol shifted the topic. "Has Marge moved out yet?" "Honestly, I have no idea. We left her packing at the restaurant," I replied, feeling a mix of anxiety and anticipation. "While you're in town, pick up some new door locks. Call me if you need anything tonight. Frank and I can swing by, but we'd need to bring the kids." "Thanks, Carol, but I think I'll manage. The help I need is right here," I said, glancing at the girls, who exchanged knowing grins. Their innocent camaraderie was a small comfort amidst the growing tension. After devouring our ice cream, we made our way back to the car. I had to inform Rachel's mother that I'd be the sole adult watching over the girls that evening, and I wanted to ensure she was okay with it. After all, there are all sorts of strange people in the world these days, and not having met Rachel's mother made me cautious. I parked outside the cab office and headed inside, spotting Rachel's mother as she was leaving. "I'm Pete Thomas, looking for Rachel's mom," I introduced myself to the cabbie behind the counter. Oddly enough, I didn't even know her real name, we simply referred to her as Rachel's mom, and Rachel called her mom. The cabbie gestured toward a door marked "Ladies Only," and as I stood there, the other drivers turned their attention to the TV, leaving me in an uncomfortable silence. Moments later, Andorra stepped out, and I was taken aback by her beauty. Clad in tight jeans and a simple blouse, she radiated an effortless charm that made her look like she had just walked off a fashion runway. "Hey, Pete. Is something wrong?" she asked, her smile quickly fading into concern. I hesitated, nerves fluttering in my stomach. "No, not really. I just need to talk privately." The cab drivers began to leave, but Andorra insisted they stay as we stepped outside. "What's up, Peter? You don't look too good," she observed, glancing at the girls in the car. "Marge left me," I stammered, unsure of how to express the swirling emotions within me. It was an odd experience talking to Andorra for the first time, especially since she seemed to recognize me. "Oh, poor thing," she replied empathetically. "Does this mean we have a childcare problem tonight?" No, I just wanted to let you know I'll be looking after the kids alone," I clarified. "I thought you should be informed since we've never met." Andorra's expression softened. "Rachel talks about you all the time. She treats you like a surrogate father and even has a picture of you next to her bed." "Where did she get that?" I asked, surprised. "Orderly gave it to her, I suppose. Do you want me to take the day off and watch the girls?" No, I'm perfectly capable of looking after Rachel. She's in good hands, believe me," I reassured her, taking her hand in mine. "Maybe you could come by tomorrow so we can discuss the future?" "The future?" Andorra echoed, a hint of concern in her voice. "Don't worry, we can figure something out. The girls have plenty of ideas." Her relief was palpable as she smiled back. "Thank you. Yes, that sounds good. I'll see you tomorrow night. And don't worry about Rachel, she's wonderful." With that, Andorra bent down to kiss the girls goodnight, her warmth radiating a sense of comfort. As we pulled into the driveway, an unfamiliar car caught my eye, parked haphazardly in front of our house. Marge emerged from it just as I stopped the car. "Where have you been?" "I've been waiting for hours," she demanded, her tone sharp. Before I could respond, she curtly informed us she was leaving. Her demeanor was a stark contrast to the person I once knew. "If that's who I think it is, tell him to move his car before I do it for him," I snapped, my irritation boiling over at the sight of her new guy, who was casually sitting in the Jaguar. Marge gestured, and the car roared to life, careening across the street, ignoring her demands. I swiftly reversed into the spot where the Jaguar had been parked, and Marge protested, "You almost hit me." "Oh, you're still here? I thought you left," I shot back, feeling a rush of defiance as I headed to the front door. "Aren't you taking your car?" I asked, noting her Nissan sat empty while the Jaguar was filled with her belongings. "Not worth it. We're flying out on Wednesday," she replied dismissively. "Where do I send the divorce papers?" I thought but didn't voice it. She interrupted my thoughts. "Ronnie's lawyer's address is on the kitchen table." Her tone was curt, and she turned her attention to Orderly and Rachel. I didn't want to hear any more, so I stepped inside with the girls trailing behind me. They exchanged high fives, but I paid little attention to their childish antics. We settled in to watch TV for a while before I sent the girls to bed. To my surprise, they went without a fuss, which was a first for Orderly. After their bedtime, I poured myself a couple of whiskeys, hoping the alcohol would soothe my restless mind and help me sleep. Sunday morning, I woke to the tantalizing aroma of frying bacon. For a fleeting moment, I forgot that Marge had left and thought she was preparing breakfast. But reality quickly set in, and I remembered the chaos of the previous day. The room felt different, eerily empty. All traces of Marge seemed to have vanished, even her parents' pictures were missing. I shuffled to the bathroom, and it dawned on me that her personal items had also disappeared. It appeared someone had tidied up while I slept. "Come on, Dad. Breakfast is getting cold." Orderly called from the stairs, pulling me back to reality. In the kitchen, the girls insisted I sit while they served breakfast, fries, orange juice, and coffee, like a scene from a cozy little hotel. They had corn flakes, juice, and tea waiting for me. I praised their culinary skills, and their faces lit up with pride. Just as we were finishing, Carol, Frank, and their kids arrived, bringing a fresh wave of energy into the house. The chaotic chatter filled the air, and although the calm of the morning was shattered, it felt strangely comforting. As the kids quickly took over the scene, I knew we would find a way to navigate this new chapter together. I sat down with a steaming cup of coffee, reflecting on the whirlwind of events that had unfolded the previous day. My friends, Frank and Carol, sat across from me, offering their unwavering support. Frank had a lead on a highly recommended divorce lawyer, while Carol, ever resourceful, whipped up dinner from whatever was left in the fridge. I spent the morning tending to my roses, finding solace in their beauty as I chatted softly to them. In the afternoon, Rachel and her orderly helper joined me, and when Rachel quoted a line from the song "It's Been a Good Year for the Roses," it resonated deeply with me, given the upheaval I was facing. Around 4:30, a cab pulled up, and Andorra arrived. The girls welcomed her in, and we quickly got acquainted. The three of us, Carol, Andorra, and I, discussed a babysitting plan for the girls. Andorra excitedly shared that she had secured a Sunday night shift, which would pay better than her current job. We fine-tuned our arrangements with a few minor adjustments, ensuring Carol could lend a hand during school vacations. When Andorra called her boss to confirm the extra shift, her immediate acceptance filled the room with optimism. As I nodded in agreement, we all realized that Rachel needed school clothes for the next day. Carol kindly drove Andorra and Rachel home to grab them, with orderly insisting on tagging along. As I carried Rachel's bag inside, I turned to Andorra and asked, "Do you drive?" She sighed and replied, "Yeah, but since Tony left, I can't afford a car." I thought for a moment, then pointed to Mark's car parked nearby. "What about using the Micra?" I suggested. "I can't," she responded, confusion crossing her face. "Why not?" I pressed, feeling frustrated. She told me to get rid of it. "You'll need it to drive orderly to and from school." She hesitated, then asked, "Are you sure?" "Yes, let's call the insurance company and add you as a driver," I insisted, trying to be helpful. We both chuckled when orderly corrected me, saying, "His name is Ronald, Dad." "Who cares? He's Ronald the Rat to me." I shot back, half seriously. "But he's funny and cute," orderly insisted, referring to a beloved puppet character from TV. I couldn't help but smile. "Okay, Ronald the Rat it is." In the following weeks, we settled into our new routine. Carol and Frank often visited on Saturdays, checking the pantry and occasionally cooking lunch for us. Though housework was never my strong suit, I did my best to keep things organized, and Carol never once complained. While weekdays could feel lonely, I adapted. Fridays became a highlight, as I returned home to Andorra and the girls. Andorra often prepared a delicious meal for us before heading to her shift that night. Yet, the hardest moments were when I returned to an empty house and faced the silence of waking up alone. The bitterness I felt toward Marg after years of marriage lingered, making those solitary mornings especially challenging. The divorce process wasn't straightforward. Marg and her new partner had left the country, traveling extensively and making it difficult for her attorney to reach her. I discovered that her ex-husband was demanding child support and had blocked his UK accounts. I played my part by informing Marg's attorney about her whereabouts whenever she called, thanks to Orderly, who managed to pry out the details. I wasn't sure if Orderly understood why I needed that information, but his efforts proved invaluable. At a court hearing, Marg's solicitor asked for yet another adjournment, claiming they were still trying to get in touch with her. Frustrated, the judge turned to me and inquired if I knew where Marg was. Standing up, I replied, "I'm sorry, sir. I haven't spoken to my wife since she left us." I deliberately omitted mentioning Marg's calls to Orderly every 3 weeks. The judge didn't ask about those. The judge noted Marg's unreasonable behavior in not communicating with her attorney and suggested I had grounds for desertion. He granted my divorce and awarded me full custody of Orderly. "I don't see how joint custody can work if Mrs. Thomas can't communicate with her attorney," he stated. "Mr. Thomas, I grant you full custody and terminate Mrs. Thomas's parental rights, with one condition: you must inform her that she has 21 days to appear in court if she wishes to contest." Turning back to me, he expressed surprise that I hadn't demanded child support from my wife. "Frankly, Your Honor, I don't see much chance of collecting it unless Marg returns to the country," I replied. The judge ordered a nominal monthly support payment of $100, doubting I would ever receive it but establishing a legal precedent. He advised my legal representatives to investigate any assets Marg might have in the UK. As I left the court, I felt a sense of liberation. I was now a single man with full custody of Orderly and rights to any property Marg owned in the country. I didn't even consider searching for it. On Monday, I noticed an international call on the log from the day before, likely from Margaret. Neither Orderly nor Rachel mentioned the call or her whereabouts, which struck me as unusual. I pieced it together but chose not to dwell on it, focusing instead on our new rhythm of life. Over time, Marg's calls to Orderly became less frequent, and I was not surprised. They were largely one-sided, aside from Orderly's subtle inquiries about Marg's location, which eventually ceased once her boyfriend's divorce settled. Somehow, both Orderly and Rachel seemed to know about it, likely through their school connections. About 4 months later, while we were enjoying a movie and burgers on a Saturday, Rachel casually mentioned that she and her mother would soon be moving due to a rent increase. I was unaware this was part of a larger scheme. It turned out that the girls had conspired for Andorra and Rachel to move in with us. During dinner one Friday, Orderly innocently asked Andorra if she had found an apartment yet. Rachel chimed in with exaggerated horror stories about their search, and then Orderly suggested, "Why don't Rachel and Andorra move in with us?" I thought Orderly's idea made sense. This would save Andorra from paying rent and reduce the amount of running around we had to do. I glanced at Andorra for her thoughts, but she quickly averted her gaze, leaving me to ponder the implications of this unexpected arrangement. I found myself in a delicate situation, not wanting to dismiss Andorra's suggestion outright or place her in an uncomfortable position. You know, sometimes people can misunderstand the dynamics of a man and woman living together, I said cautiously, trying to navigate the conversation carefully. Andorra chuckled, her laughter cutting through the tension. "Geez, Pete. You sound like a prude," she teased. "I'm just looking out for your reputation," I replied, feigning seriousness. "My reputation? You must be joking. I already deal with enough rumors at my apartment. People whisper because I'm gone every weekend and drive a flashy new car. They think I'm up to something scandalous," I admitted, half laughing at the absurdity of it all. "Wait, are you serious?" she asked, eyes wide with disbelief. "Absolutely. They even wrote to my landlord. I told them I work at a cab company, but the whispers just won't die down." "You really need to get out of there," she advised, shaking her head. "I know, but finding a decent, affordable apartment is harder than it sounds. What about that idea we discussed?" "There's plenty of room at my place," Andorra suggested, a spark of hope in her voice. "True, but without the girls, this place feels like a morgue. And let's face it, you're not a bad cook. Should I take that as a compliment?" "Of course. The room is yours if you want it," she offered, her enthusiasm palpable. With a grin, I replied, "The girls seem excited about this plan. We'll need to discuss rent, though." "No need for that," Andorra insisted. "I can't stand housekeeping, and you cook better than I do. How about I cover the utilities, and you take care of the cooking?" "All right, we can discuss the details later," I agreed. "Are you sure you want to move in?" "If you're inviting us, then yes, we'd love to." "Then it's settled. When do you want to move in?" "Our apartment is furnished, so most of my things can be tossed. I sold the good stuff years ago after Tony left when I needed the money," she said, a hint of sadness creeping into her voice. And so, the plan was set in motion. Andorra and Rachel moved in with me and the girls the following week. Most of Andorra's furniture was discarded, but a few cherished items made their way into our home, with others finding refuge in the garage. Her TV and music center found a new home in the girls' room, and just like that, the house began to feel like a home again. As the days passed, I noticed a remarkable shift in my mood. I stopped indulging in after-work drinks, focusing instead on the joyful routine of reading bedtime stories to my 2 daughters. My traveling days ended when Marge left. My boss shifted the trips to others, allowing me to settle into this new domestic life. It wasn't long before I began to develop feelings for Andorra, even as I tried to keep them hidden. She was a year younger than me, always looking immaculate, her laughter infectious and her sense of humor a perfect match for my quirks. She never resented my daughters or the baggage I carried. Instead, she embraced us with open arms. I realized I was falling for her the moment we met. One evening, while setting the table with Carol, she suddenly turned to me with an insightful look. "Have you told Andorra yet?" "Told her what?" I asked, puzzled. "That you're in love with her, you fool," Carol laughed. "Don't be silly, Carol. You're imagining things," I replied, trying to dismiss her enthusiasm. "Pete, I can read you like a book. You're more hooked on Andorra than you were on Stephanie Mathers," she exclaimed. Stephanie Mathers had been my high school crush, a bittersweet memory that Carol and her friends helped me bury after she broke my heart. "I'm attached to Andorra, but I don't want to upset the balance," I admitted, the weight of my feelings evident in my tone. "Peter, she likes you just as much as you like her. You two act like school kids in love." "What do you mean?" I questioned, intrigued. "You both avoid touching each other. Either you hate each other, which I doubt, or you're completely in love." "Do you really think Andorra likes me?" I asked, a flicker of hope igniting within me. "Absolutely, Pete. She's as smitten as you are. Even the girls see it." "What should I do?" "Just tell her how you feel. You've charmed women before." "Marge was different," I replied, shaking my head. "I never liked her." "No, you didn't trust her," Carol corrected. "But those two little girls love you, which I never thought Marge did." "Marge loved me when we married," I countered, but my mind was racing. "Think what you want, Pete. Now there's a woman in the kitchen who truly loves you. You need to find a way to melt the ice." Just as our conversation reached a crescendo, Andorra walked in, interrupting us to check on the dinner preparations. Carol's eyes twinkled mischievously as she exchanged private jokes with Rachel, leaving me with a sense of longing I couldn't shake. For the next few days, I almost gathered the courage to tell Andorra how I felt, but hesitation always held me back. Then came New Year's Eve. Andorra had to work, and Carol and Frank took the girls out for a celebration. I contemplated going to a party with some colleagues but reluctantly agreed when they insisted. By 4 a.m., the party was winding down. I called for a cab, and to my surprise, Andorra answered. "Hey gorgeous, can you send one of the guys to take me home?" I slurred, half laughing at my own state. "Are you mad, Pete?" Andorra replied, her tone a mix of concern and amusement. I had a hard time deciding which phone to call. "Try not to throw up in the car," I joked, even as the world around me spun slightly. Phil, the driver, arrived to help me into the cab. As we drove, I realized with a sense of confusion that we weren't heading to my house. "You're going the wrong way," I muttered, feeling the effects of the alcohol hit me harder. "You need someone to put you to bed, and it won't be me," Phil said with a smirk. "I think I know who will volunteer," I replied, half asleep. I must have dozed off, because the next thing I knew, Phil and Andorra were helping me out of the car. She clung to my arm, guiding me to the door. Phil helped me upstairs, and suddenly Andorra was there, loosening my clothes to make me comfortable. In my intoxicated state, I saw this as the perfect opportunity. As she leaned over me, I muttered, "You know, you're one hell of an attractive woman." "What does that mean?" she asked, her brow furrowed in curiosity. "That you're good enough to eat, and I'm hungry," I slurred, managing a smirk. "How much have you had to drink?" she inquired, concern mixing with amusement. "Not enough," I replied, my heart racing. "Yeah, but if I drank a little more, I'd have the courage to tell you how much I love you." The confession hung in the air, heavy with possibility, as I held my breath, waiting for her response. "I'll believe it when you tell me sober," Andorra said with a smile as she stood to leave. But I couldn't let her go just yet. I gently grabbed her arm, pulling her down beside me on the bed. To my surprise, she didn't resist, and soon I drifted off to sleep, the weight of my hangover forgotten for the moment. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the window, intensifying the pounding in my head. Disappointment washed over me when I discovered that Andorra was no longer by my side. As I tried to lift my head, a groan escaped my lips. "Here, have a drink," I heard Andorra's voice behind me. "What is it?" I asked, shielding my eyes from the bright light. "It can't be poison until you marry me. I need life insurance on you first," she joked. "How do you know I won't bump you off first?" I shot back, trying to keep the mood light. "You can't, you have 2 daughters to look after," she smirked. "One of them is yours," I reminded her, our banter easing the tension between us. "They think of themselves as sisters," she noted, smiling. "And you're like their dad now." "Yeah, well, she's called me mom several times recently," I added, surprised at the realization. "I hadn't noticed," she said, sounding genuinely surprised. "And Rachel's been calling you daddy for a month now." "Really? Did she?" I asked, astonished. "Yes, even Carol and Frank have noticed," I confirmed. "Did you discuss it with Carol on Boxing Day?" she inquired, a hint of curiosity in her voice. "I discussed a lot with Carol," I replied, chuckling. "Is she already planning her wedding outfit?" Andorra looked thoughtful as she held the drink she'd prepared for me. The moment hung in the air, and I decided to break the silence. "So, are you going to marry me or not?" "You didn't ask me," she pointed out, raising an eyebrow. "I wanted to know your answer before I asked." "It's less embarrassing if I get rejected," I explained. "Well, you wouldn't look foolish if you asked," she replied, her tone softening. But then she hesitated. "I have a confession. I'm not a widow. Tony's not dead, legally, I was never married to him," she revealed. I was taken aback. "I'm confused. What do you mean?" "Tony was a bigamist. He was already married when he married me, so our marriage is null and void," she explained. "Wow, so you're not a widow and you were never married?" I clarified, still processing the revelation. "Yes, it's easier to tell everyone I'm a widow," she admitted, a hint of sadness in her voice. "In that case, would you do me the honor of," I started, but we got sidetracked. The next hour passed in a blissful haze of kisses and hugs, almost making me forget my headache. By the time Frank brought the girls home at 3 p.m., Andorra and I were in the kitchen, planning how to break the news to them. As soon as we mentioned our engagement, the girls seemed to understand immediately, likely because Andorra was practically sitting in my lap. They hugged us both tightly, and when Frank entered the room, he beamed, saying, "Congratulations." We settled on a date for mid-February and planned a modest celebration, though the girls lobbied for something more extravagant. Ultimately, we agreed on a small event with the wedding at the registry office and a little reception afterward. With neither of us having many living relatives, the registry office made sense. It avoided the complications of public announcements and kept things simple for Andorra, who was supposed to be a widow. Once Frank went home, Andorra faced the delicate task of resigning from her job at the taxi company. She wouldn't work night shifts due to personal preferences, which irritated me since I disliked sleeping alone. We decided to sleep in separate bedrooms until the wedding to set a good example for the girls regarding extramarital relations. Still, I couldn't help but develop the habit of coming home for long lunches once the girls returned to school. It significantly improved my mood. The following weekend, Andorra wrapped up her last shifts at the taxi depot, bringing home flowers and chocolates from her colleagues. That Sunday night, several drivers and their wives invited us out for dinner and fun at a local pub, making cabs scarce around town. The wedding day arrived quickly and went off without a hitch. Our girls were the perfect bridesmaids, and Andorra looked absolutely stunning. We spent our wedding night in a honeymoon suite at the luxury hotel where we held the reception, while Frank and Carol took the girls home. Our plan for the summer was to travel with the girls, making the most of their school vacation. That first year, we spent 5 weeks driving around Florida, the Caribbean, and Southern California, soaking up every experience we could. A week or two after the wedding, I sensed something was amiss when I got home from work. The girls were happy, but Andorra appeared upset. Once the girls went to bed, she confided in me, "Does Rachel know Tony isn't dead?" "How could she know?" I asked, shocked since we had never discussed it in front of the girls. Andorra explained that the girls often hid pictures of Marjorie and Tony in their drawers. When asked why, Rachel had replied, "We don't need them, we don't want to look at their pictures." Rachel understood that her father hadn't died in a car accident, he had run away, although she didn't know the full story. Andorra chose not to explain further, wanting to avoid the awkward conversation about Rachel being technically illegitimate. Surprisingly, Rachel didn't seem troubled by the truth, which I hoped would help the girls feel closer. Andorra turned out to be an incredible wife and mother. She was patient with both the kids and me, even when things got chaotic at the office. Despite my flaws, Andorra never mentioned them and always had a wonderful sense of humor, often playfully teasing me. Our nights, while sometimes tiring, were filled with love and laughter. By early summer, Marjorie's calls to Andorra had nearly ceased, but when she did call, Andorra had to reprimand her for referring to her as Mommy. During these conversations, Marjorie would switch tactics, talking about our family activities and calling Andorra Daddy's wife, while referring to Rachel as her sister. We discussed Marjorie's behavior but realized we couldn't create an exhaustive list of rules to forbid certain words and phrases. Marjorie had to face the consequences of her actions. As our vacation drew to a close, both Marjorie and Rachel began asking if we were truly their mom and dad. They even left printouts about adoption procedures around the house, hinting at the possibility of Andorra adopting Marjorie and me adopting Rachel. They even discovered forms for changing Rachel's name to Thomas. The idea of family was evolving, and we were excited about the journey ahead. I made the decision to pursue both adoptions, knowing that Rachel's father, despite his absence, still had legal rights. Our attorney, who was handling my divorce case, guided us through the process. It took more than a year, but we ultimately succeeded in terminating Tony's parental rights, completing the adoptions in due course. Coincidentally, the same judge who presided over my divorce also oversaw the termination proceedings. Legally, we became Mr. and Mrs. Thomas, with our beloved daughters, Audley and Rachel. As our new family settled in, we contemplated expanding our family even further but ultimately decided against it. Shortly after our marriage, I received a promotion that came with a significant pay raise and greater responsibilities. Our lives took on a more adventurous flair as we made summer trips a regular occurrence, compensating for my lack of travel during my earlier years. In our second year of marriage, we spent 5 weeks exploring Europe. The following year, we ventured to India and Sri Lanka, and in the fourth year, we found ourselves in Australia and New Zealand. By the time we reached our fifth summer, Audley and Rachel, both now 14, eagerly documented our travels with video cameras. We began to plan an ambitious trip to Canada, the northern United States, and Alaska, diving into detailed itineraries together. About 2 years after our marriage, we began receiving Christmas cards from Marjorie, Rachel's biological mother. Although we couldn't reciprocate because there was no return address, the cards bore Canadian stamps, indicating that Marjorie and Ronald had settled there. Marjorie was rarely mentioned in our home, and she hadn't reached out to Audley in years, so no one felt the need to bring her up. As the time approached for our summer vacation, our original plans took a turn when the girls pointed out that we couldn't visit all the desired locations in the timeframe we had. Even after trimming down our itinerary, we decided to focus our trip on the western regions that summer, saving the eastern sites for another year. We arrived in Winnipeg on an Air Canada flight in late June, spending a day or two exploring the city's rich history. From Manitoba, we set out on a road trip through Saskatchewan, heading south through the Dakotas, Nebraska, and Kansas before turning west and north through Colorado and Wyoming. One highlight was a stay at a dude ranch. While I enjoyed the horseback riding, I preferred English saddles to Western ones. I felt more secure in them, especially in the event of an emergency. There are two schools of thought about riding horses or motorcycles: either stay with it and try to regain control, or back off and hope for a safe fall. I've never found the idea of being on a horse or motorcycle with a spinning rear wheel appealing. Eventually, we made our way into Montana, stopping in a charming town I had always wanted to visit, likely one I had read about in some Western novel. After checking into a cozy motel, we ventured to a nearby diner for dinner. The diner was bustling with chatter, but suddenly, the noise was interrupted by a loud crash as a waitress dropped a tray of food. Andor and I, like everyone else in the diner, turned to see what had happened. To my surprise, I recognized the waitress. She recognized me too, and her shock at seeing me caused her to drop the tray. The poor woman stood there, frozen in disbelief, her eyes wide with recognition. Andor recognized her as well, and we both instinctively turned to our daughters, saying almost in unison, "Eat your dinner, Rachel and Ordley. There's nothing to worry about." Despite the fact that we had adopted each other's children 5 years ago, we still tended to scold our own first. The girls were curious, trying to catch a glimpse of the commotion. Ordley quickly recognized the woman and muttered, "So be it," before returning to her meal. Rachel, on the other hand, stared a little longer, smiled at me, glanced at her mother, and then resumed eating. The other diners, realizing the incident was connected to us, stared for a moment, but we paid them no mind and continued our meal in relative peace. "Maybe the grass isn't as green as it seems," Andor whispered as we made our way to the car with the girls. "What do you mean?" I asked, a bit curtly. "If she's working here, she's probably not with Ronald anymore. One of them must have cheated," Andor replied, attempting to make sense of the situation. "Once a cheater, always a cheater," I noted. "But she didn't cheat on me, she left us. Abandoning her daughter is just as damaging as cheating. Either she couldn't stay faithful, or he couldn't. Does it matter?" Andor pressed. "Only if she tries to cause trouble. Ordley has been through enough already," I said firmly. "It's too late for her to create any more chaos," Andor said, a hint of frustration in her tone. "Ordley handled it better than you did, after all." Andor began to say something else, but I interrupted her. "I know what the girls did, and I'm glad we have such clever little manipulators. I just wonder how far their plans extend." "What do you mean?" Andor asked, looking puzzled. "Nothing major, just that they seem to be working towards something. Sometimes, I wonder how far in advance they've planned everything." "Don't worry," I reassured her. "I'm genuinely pleased with how things are. I'm just curious, that's all." Andor smiled reassuringly as we reached the car. I unlocked the doors with the remote, and the girls eagerly jumped into the back seat. I opened the front door for Andor, but she didn't get in right away. Instead, she came up to me, wrapped her arms around my neck, and kissed me tenderly. The girls in the back murmured and shouted approvingly, teasing us with playful comments like, "Not in public," and "Wait until you're in your room." Despite their light-hearted banter, both girls had matured well beyond their years, shaped by their challenging pasts. Rachel had lost her father when she was 6, and Ordley's mother had left them when she was 8. Suddenly, Andor interrupted our kiss, whispering, "We have an audience." I glanced over my shoulder and noticed Marguerite standing in the kitchen doorway, watching us. "Do you think Ordley should?" Andor began to suggest, but I quickly cut her off, recognizing the gravity of the situation unfolding before us. "I don't think we have a choice," I replied, my mind already racing ahead to the inevitable conversation I would have with Marjorie later. I knew I had to arrange for our daughter, Orderly, to meet her mother without me present. Andorra leaned against the car, her gaze steady as she spoke. "Your mom is inside. I really think you should go see her." Orderly's reluctance was palpable. "Do I have to?" she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "She is your mother," Andorra reminded her gently. "You might regret missing this opportunity years from now." With a heavy sigh, Orderly finally climbed out of the car, glancing back at us, clearly torn. "I don't want to see her." Maybe Rachel can ride with me. No, we'll be right here, Andorra reassured her. With hesitation, Orderly walked toward Marjorie, stopping about 10 feet away. I couldn't hear their conversation, but it was evident that Orderly was doing most of the talking. Every time Marjorie stepped closer, Orderly would retreat, and I felt a tightening knot of frustration in my stomach. "That's not good," Andorra muttered under her breath. "Apparently so," I replied, watching as Orderly turned and sprinted back to the car, slamming the door behind her and fastening her seatbelt as if it could shield her from the emotional turmoil outside. Marjorie had vanished from view, and a part of me wanted to drive away. But Andorra had other plans and was already making her way toward the door before Orderly finished buckling up. I waited about 10 minutes, tapping my fingers nervously on the steering wheel until Andorra returned, her expression unreadable. I shot her a questioning look as she settled into the passenger seat. She glanced back at the girls and shot me a look that said, "Shut up and drive. We'll discuss this later." After lunch, we strolled along the river path, taking in the natural beauty of the waterfalls that had given the town its name. Even though the hydroelectric dams had diminished their original grandeur, the waterfalls still held a certain magic. Andorra and I never pushed ourselves too hard on hikes. It was more about the experience than the exertion. The girls ran ahead, giving us a chance to talk. "So, what did she say?" I finally asked. "She left him. Dumped him 2 years ago for some waitress in this town," Andorra replied, her voice steady but tinged with concern. "But I wonder why she didn't just go back to the UK. She was left with the motel bill, so she stayed to work it off," Andorra explained. "Now she shares a room with another woman. They both work in the restaurant during the day and serve drinks at the bar at night." "Sounds like a blast," I muttered sarcastically. "What else is she doing?" Andorra shot me a look. "What do you expect? She's probably stuck in a rut, working hard to pay her dues." "No need to be nasty, Peter," she added. "Marjorie made a mistake, and now she's paying for it. Anyway, you'll meet her after her shift at the restaurant at 6. She only has a couple of hours before her bar shift, so you can talk while I take the kids out for a bite." "What am I supposed to tell her?" I asked, my frustration bubbling to the surface. "You need to finish, Peter. No matter what you believe, you need to sit down and talk to her. Remember, she's Orderly's mother. Does she even remember that?" I snapped back, my skepticism evident. Andorra's tone softened. "She regrets her actions and wants to apologize to Orderly and you. But I don't think Orderly is ready to accept that yet. That was clear at lunch. We just have to make sure we don't lose her again." I could hear the sincerity in Andorra's voice, but the bitterness in my heart made it hard to accept. "Are you being magnanimous about all this, considering what Tony did to you?" I asked, my skepticism returning. "Pete, is there any point in going through life with hate?" Andorra replied, her conviction unwavering. "What Tony did to me was worse than what Marjorie did to you or Orderly. For a while, I hated him and the other women he deceived into marrying him. But one day, while sitting in the police station waiting room, I realized we were all in the same boat. We had all been fooled, and none of us were to blame. So, we became friends. What's the point of cursing the idiot?" She continued. "If he shows up, I'll report him to the police, but I won't waste time hating him. I have more important people to worry about." I couldn't argue with that. "Good idea, Andorra," I conceded. "I know my love. We'd better hurry, it's 4 o'clock now," she said, glancing at the time. As I waited in the restaurant parking lot, anticipation twisted in my stomach. When Marjorie finally came off duty, she emerged with another dark-haired woman who scrutinized me before heading on her way. Marjorie looked nervous, not the confident woman I had last seen laying down the law in our kitchen years ago. Despite her unease, she was still quite attractive. "Hi, Peter. Thanks for coming," Marjorie greeted me, her voice tentative. I gestured for her to take the lead, silently following her to a booth in the back of the bar. It was clear we were expected. The dark-haired woman behind the bar conversed with the bartender as we entered, and all the booths next to ours were conspicuously empty. The woman approached our table, setting 2 beers down and saying something in Spanish to Marjorie. She nodded in response, and I noted that she had clearly picked up the language during her time here. "You wanted to see me?" I finally said, reminding her that I hadn't asked for this meeting. I just wanted to say I'm sorry," Marjorie whispered, her voice barely audible. Her words caught me off guard. "No, you've done me a great favor," I replied, realizing the gravity of our conversation had only just begun. "I have to be honest," I said, a hint of exasperation in my voice. "I'm not cut out to be a ruthless diplomat." Marjorie shot me a bitter glance. "Well, it seems Andorra got the better end of that deal," she retorted. "I should have seen it coming. She would latch onto you the moment I was out of the picture." "It was the other way around, Marjorie," I countered, feeling a mixture of irritation and sympathy. The truth was, as soon as I laid eyes on Andorra, a strange sense of connection flickered between us. I hesitated, unsure how to articulate my thoughts. Maybe if I had met Andorra before Marjorie left, things would have turned out differently. But perhaps that was just wishful thinking. Deep down, I knew I was too bound by duty and other obligations to act selfishly. "Sometimes I wonder if this whole situation is just one big failure," I mused, breaking the silence. "Whatever happened to Loverboy, anyway?" I couldn't help but ask. "And where did he get all that money?" Marjorie's eyes darkened. "You know he abandoned his wife and kids without a dime to their name. She seized all his bank accounts, Ronald's money, if you can even call it that." She scoffed. "It's just a joke. It was everyone else's money, really. Peter, he's a crook, wanted in so many places. I wouldn't be surprised if that's the reason he left me." I was taken aback. "You mean you were involved with him in some way?" "Let's just say I helped him with some scams," she replied, her tone laced with regret. "We had to leave Argentina in a hurry when my picture showed up in the local papers. I think he crossed into Canada to escape the FBI, coincidentally with one of the waitresses from the diner. And here I am, doing the job of that waitress." "Weren't the authorities after you, too?" I asked, genuinely concerned. "Pretty much," she admitted, sighing heavily. "But I made a deal with them. If I'm willing to testify against Ronald when they catch him, they agreed not to throw the book at me. I ended up with just 2 years of probation for aiding a fugitive. Now I'm stuck in the country until they find him, having to report to the authorities every week. Luckily, Buster, the deputy sheriff I report to, is usually around, either here or at the diner." "Are you still in debt?" I inquired, a sense of dread creeping over me. "Drowning," she confessed. "I signed over almost everything, including Ronald's rental car. That woman just drove off with it. I've nearly paid it all off, but there's still a few thousand left." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my checkbook. "No, Pete, I can't," Marjorie protested, panic flashing in her eyes. "For once in your life, do as you're told, Marjorie," I said firmly. "I'm writing this check for $5,000, that's about $10,000. It should clear your debts and give you some breathing room if you ever decide to go back to the UK. When they finally catch him, we'll help you find a place and settle in, but don't think this gives you the right to interfere with our family. The courts have stripped you of all parental rights regarding Orderly. You know that, don't you?" She nodded, her face clouded with remorse. "Oh, I'm sorry. That's not why we sent her to you," she replied softly. I realized that when Andorra walked into the kitchen. "Pete, I was stupid," she continued, her voice cracking. "I never meant to hurt you or Orderly. I got swept up in Ronald's thrilling stories, but it wasn't worth it." "I assure you, Marjorie, that was a long time ago," I replied, trying to keep my tone steady. "I'm just relieved you're safe now, but Orderly and I have built a new life, and you are no longer part of it. Andorra and I will ensure Orderly keeps in touch with you." Marjorie looked overwhelmed. "That's more than I deserve, Peter, and I really don't deserve this check," she said, shaking her head. "Well, you'd better take it. It will ease my conscience a little," I insisted. "Tomorrow morning, we'll stop by the diner for breakfast. Maybe we can get Orderly to talk to you one more time." "I don't deserve your kindness, Peter," she repeated, her voice wavering. "No, Marjorie, I need to make my point clear," I said, standing up. "You are Orderly's mother, and there's nothing I can do about that now. If you don't mind, I'd like to return to my family." "I'm sorry, Pete," she whispered, and I walked away, not daring to look back. When I found the girls, they were waiting for me, bubbling with excitement. I pulled Andorra aside and briefly shared my conversation with Marjorie and the money I had given her. "She doesn't deserve you," was all Andorra said in response to my mention of the check. "That's pretty much what she said," I replied, planting a kiss on her cheek. Later, I approached Orderly, ready to start my "you only have one birth mother" speech, but she interrupted me. "Andorra and Rachel already came over," she said, a spark of defiance in her eyes. From there, the conversation took a different turn. Orderly said she would talk to her mother the next morning and insisted that she wouldn't be alone with her. "Either Rachel or I need to be there," she added firmly. "Why?" I asked, curious. "Because one of us was always present during the funeral," she replied curtly, leaving me speechless. The next morning, Marjorie, Orderly, and Rachel sat at a nearby table, deep in conversation. I could only guess that Marjorie's friends were covering for her, as I knew she had work to do. Andorra and I could only catch snippets of their chat, with the girls excitedly discussing how beautifully the roses were blooming in their garden. As we drove away, I glanced back to see Marjorie walking to the car. She leaned down and kissed both girls goodbye, then turned to Andorra and me. "These two are very lucky," she said, her voice unexpectedly warm. "They have found themselves the best mom and dad in the world." Her words caught me off guard, and before I could respond, she turned and dashed back into the restaurant, likely in tears. I kissed my wife, and we got into the car, driving north toward the Calgary border. The children in the backseat exchanged glances in the rearview mirror, and I couldn't shake the feeling that our lives were about to change in ways we hadn't yet imagined. Life has a way of moving forward, doesn't it? As the seasons changed, so did our lives, leaving behind the familiar comforts of our small town. It was a bittersweet return home that year, marked by a sense of closure and a flicker of hope for the future. Marjorie, despite her departure from our lives, maintained a connection with her new partner, Andor, writing to her regularly. The FBI's pursuit of Ronald remained a mystery, but less than a year later, we learned that Marjorie was set to marry her deputy sheriff, whatever his name was. Family gatherings were tinged with heartache, leading us to a collective decision: we would decline the invitation to Marjorie's wedding. Yet, despite this resolve, a part of me felt compelled to attend. Perhaps it was an urge to confront the past or simply to show support for the life she was choosing. So, I ventured there alone for a few days, a decision I still ponder. Buster, as everyone affectionately called him, turned out to be a genuinely nice guy. Upon my arrival, he picked me up from the airport and introduced me to his circle of friends and family, warmly enveloping me in their world. During our conversations, Buster shared insights about Marjorie that surprised me. She had been candid with him about her past, confessing everything she regretted. It seemed she had crafted an elaborate facade to hide her true circumstances from us, even arranging for her Christmas cards to come from various truck stops in Canada. I found it a bit odd to give my ex-wife away at her wedding, but perhaps someone had to take on that role. Maybe my presence was an attempt to bring some clarity to the chaos. As I navigated those 5 days, I suspected that Orderly and Rachel might have figured out my whereabouts. They were, after all, a step ahead of me in almost everything, and honestly, they still are. Over the following years, news trickled in about Marjorie's life. She had given birth to 2 boys. Pictures of them arrived, yet we never met them in person. I learned that as the boys grew older, they began to have regular contact with Orderly and Rachel, though neither of my daughters often mentioned Marjorie or her new family. In a twist of fate, both Orderly and Rachel ended up marrying two brothers. At times, I find myself feeling a touch of sympathy for those young men. The bond between my daughters remains incredibly strong, and their schemes often take precedence, leaving me in their wake. When those two girls conspire, it seems a man's victory is a rare occurrence. As life progressed, both daughters welcomed children into the world, and astonishingly, their births coincided closely in both timing and appearance. Andorra and I relished in the joy of watching our grandchildren grow, seeing echoes of their mothers in their laughter and playfulness. Last year marked my retirement from managing director, and now Andorra and I are indulging in an 8-month journey around the globe. We often find ourselves pondering where we might settle down. Yet, I can't shake the feeling that our daughters and their families will ultimately pull us back to the UK. Our house remains unsold, a decision the girls insisted upon, largely due to the roses that thrive in the garden. They spend countless hours tending to that patch of beauty, and just this morning, as I checked the mail, I received a photo of the garden, titled, "It's been a good year for roses." Life goes on, weaving together the threads of our past and present, and while change may be constant, love and family remain the foundation upon which we build our lives.